The question I still wrestle with is this: when a friendship is so deeply rooted, so intertwined with your life that losing it feels like losing a limb, but that friend betrays you in the most calculated and cruel way imaginable, are you still bound by loyalty? Or does the depth of the betrayal grant you permission for a corresponding act of revenge? I'm here to tell you how I found out the hard way. My best friend of 15 years, the person I shared everything with, used a deeply personal vulnerability against me, a secret that could have ruined my career and my future, simply because she was bored and jealous. She detonated my life just to watch the smoke clear, and when I discovered the extent of her treachery, I didn't just walk away, I orchestrated the most perfect, clean, and utterly devastating revenge that didn't just end her career but, quite literally, erased her most cherished professional dream. The look of utter disbelief and ruin on her face when she realized her own weapon had been turned on her was the most satisfying, yet heartbreaking, moment of my life. Tell me if you would have just quietly cut her out, or if you would have fought fire with the kind of calculated, cold fury I unleashed. My name is Clara, and I'm 30 years old. This story revolves around my former best friend Sarah. Sarah and I met in high school. We were inseparable, two halves of a whole, finishing each other's sentences, sharing every success, and comforting each other through every failure. We went to the same university, lived together for 5 years after college, and were even planning to be each other's maid of honor. She was family, the sister I never had. Our lives were a constant shared narrative. The conflict, as is often the case, was rooted in our careers, specifically, of the stark difference in our paths, and I now realize Sarah's toxic, barely concealed envy. We both work in the incredibly demanding, hyper-competitive field of architectural design. This is an industry fueled by prestige, portfolio, and networking. I was quite frankly very good at it. I had a natural knack for spatial logic and innovative, sustainable design. My career trajectory was steep. I graduated with honors, landed a job at a small, prestigious boutique firm, and after years of grueling work, was quickly elevated to the level of senior designer. I was on the fast track to partnership, and my work was starting to get noticed in regional publications. Sarah, however, struggled. She was talented, yes, but she lacked the necessary focus and the aggressive networking ability the industry demands. She bounced between mid-tier firms, often complaining that her bosses were too demanding or that the work was too creatively stifling. She was stuck in a rut, consistently designing corporate interiors while her dream, the one we both shared since university, was to design large-scale iconic public buildings, the kind that define a city skyline. This was her lifelong ambition, her obsession. Over the years, our shared dream became a source of increasing tension. I tried to help her, pulling strings to get her interviews, offering to collaborate, and constantly listening to her frustrations. But every one of my successes seemed to be a fresh wound for her. She would offer these backhanded compliments. "Oh, Clara, your work is so safe and commercial, but I'm glad it's paying the bills." Or, "It must be nice to just be handed all the easy, flashy clients." The resentment was a dull, constant hum beneath the surface of our friendship. The pivotal event that gave Sarah her ammunition, the secret she eventually weaponized, occurred about 5 years ago. I was going through a massive personal crisis. I was buckling under the pressure of my first major, high-profile project, the design for the new municipal library, and simultaneously dealing with a crippling depression following the end of a long-term, toxic relationship. I had a brief but very serious bout of burnout and severe anxiety, which led to me taking a 2-month medical leave. During that time, I was completely vulnerable. I told Sarah everything: the crushing anxiety attacks, the difficulty getting out of bed, the fear that I wasn't cut out for the job, and the fact that my medical leave was categorized as severe emotional distress and anxiety disorder. A diagnosis that, if made public in the cutthroat architectural world, unreliable, fragile, and a risk to high-pressure clients. This was my most guarded secret. Only Sarah and my doctor knew the full, unvarnished truth. She comforted me. She told me she would keep my secret safe, and she swore on our friendship that she understood the stigma. Fast forward to 6 months ago, the tension between us had reached a fever pitch. I had just secured the senior partner track, and my latest project, a stunning residential tower, had won a major industry award. Sarah, meanwhile, had been laid off again and was struggling to find work. She was bitter, withdrawn, and openly hostile toward me. Then came the competition that changed everything. The Metropolitan Civic Arts Center announced a massive, career-defining competition for a new public complex. This was Sarah's dream project, the chance to design an iconic, life-changing building. She poured everything into her submission. I was also planning to submit a design, but out of a misguided sense of loyalty and pity for her desperate ambition, I had verbally agreed to let her have a clear shot and focus my energy on my established commercial pipeline. But loyalty, it turns out, was a one-way street. I found out the truth in the most sickening, almost accidental way. My firm had a high-level security policy that required me to periodically check my personal devices for vulnerabilities, especially since I dealt with sensitive client data. A colleague of mine ran a routine scan on my laptop after I noticed some unusual slowdown. He found evidence of persistent, systematic remote access to my files, spanning several months. A Trojan file was found hidden deep in my system. I panicked. Who would want to hack my work computer? We traced the IP address. It belonged to Sarah's old apartment, where she still occasionally worked. She had installed the software on my machine months earlier, when she was supposedly helping me set up a new peripheral. I felt a cold knot of dread form in my stomach. She wasn't hacking my firm, she was hacking me. When I finally accessed the logs of what she had been looking at, I felt physically ill. It wasn't my client designs she was stealing, though she had peeked at a few. It was my personal and medical files. Specifically, the heavily encrypted folder containing my medical leave documentation and the detailed therapist's notes about my anxiety diagnosis from 5 years ago. She had downloaded the entire file. I confronted her immediately, not by phone but by showing up at her apartment, holding a printout of the access logs. "Why, Sarah? Why did you download my medical records?" She tried to deny it, but when I showed her the timestamps and the IP address, her defiance crumbled. The mask fell away and I saw the true toxic envy beneath. "Because you deserve it, Clara," she spat out, her voice raw with years of bottled-up resentment. "You always win. You get the awards, the partnership, the easy life. You're not stable. You're a mess. You're fragile. I deserve this civic center project more than you, and if I have to prove you're unfit to compete, I will. This is your Achilles heel, Clara, and I'm going to use it." She admitted it. Her plan was to submit an anonymous concern about my documented history of severe mental instability, and use the documents to derail my submission for the Civic Center project, clearing the path for her own victory. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was a cold, calculated strike at my deepest fear, using the vulnerability I had trusted her with to ruin my life. I walked out of that apartment speechless. The friendship was dead, violently murdered by her own jealousy. But the fight wasn't over. She had already submitted her design. The judging panel was meeting in 10 days. I had to act fast, decisively, and with an iron fist. I had to pivot from being the victim to being the architect of her professional demise. So that's the situation I was in. Sarah had weaponized my most private secret and was planning to use it to destroy my career and secure her lifelong dream project. I had definitive proof of her malicious hacking and ethical breach, but exposing it would require immediate, calculated action that would burn down her career for good. Before I tell you what happened next, what choice I made, and the brutal consequence I delivered, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have quietly exposed her to the authorities and let the law handle it, or would you have chosen a more public, more targeted, professional revenge that would specifically crush her dream project? I chose the targeted, professional revenge. The legal route would be slow and messy, and it might not stop the immediate threat to my reputation. I needed a surgical strike that would leverage her actions not just as a crime, but as a professional, ethical disqualifier in the eyes of the judges, the very people who held her career in their hands. I did two things simultaneously and without hesitation. First, the ethical bomb. I didn't contact the police right away. I contacted the Ethics Review Board of the Architectural Society and, more importantly, the Metropolitan Civic Arts Center Competition Ethics Committee. I didn't send them the medical records. I wouldn't stoop to her level. Instead, I sent them the full, time-stamped log of her unauthorized and systematic digital intrusion into my confidential personal and professional files, including her IP address and the precise file path she accessed. I also included a detailed affidavit recounting her confession and her stated intent to use the stolen data to manipulate the judging process. I framed it as a catastrophic breach of professional conduct and ethical integrity by a competitor. The impact was immediate. The Ethics Committee, which prides itself on the integrity of the selection process, was horrified. They didn't even need to look at her design. The simple fact that a competitor had engaged in hacking and attempted blackmail to gain an unfair advantage was enough to trigger an emergency hearing and an immediate, public disqualification. Second, the strategic counter-submission. While the Ethics Committee was scrambling, I submitted my own design for the Civic Arts Center. I worked non-stop for the next 7 days, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and righteous fury. I didn't submit a safe design. I submitted the most ambitious, visionary, and frankly unstable design of my career, the kind of risky, boundary-pushing architecture that I had always held back on, the kind of iconic work that Sarah dreamed of creating. I named the design Phoenix Rising, a deliberate nod to overcoming my own past struggles, My submission was technically flawless and breathtakingly creative. The disqualification hearing happened 4 days later, 2 days before the design review was finalized. Sarah was formally and publicly disqualified from the competition and referred to the state licensing board for a severe ethical review, which would almost certainly lead to a temporary suspension of her license. The dream was dead, murdered by her own hand. The climax came that weekend at the competition gala. I was there, not as a winner, but as one of the 3 finalists. Sarah, in her total delusion, had somehow managed to get an invitation, likely believing she could still plead her case or cause a scene. She was standing in the lobby when I arrived. Her face was pale, blotchy, and contorted with a mixture of disbelief and consuming hate. She rushed me, not screaming but hissing. "You snake! You exposed everything! My license is gone! You did this over one little file!" I looked her dead in the eye, perfectly calm. "I didn't expose one little file, Sarah. I exposed the truth of your character. You tried to weaponize my deepest vulnerability and professional fear against me to achieve a goal you couldn't earn honestly. You committed an ethical crime against a friend. The committee didn't need your stolen medical file. They just needed to see the proof that you were willing to destroy another human being's life for your own gain. You disqualified yourself the moment you pressed the download button." I took a breath and delivered the final, crushing blow. "And just so you know, my design, Phoenix Rising, is currently one of the final 3 designs. The kind of iconic work you wanted to do. I'm doing it. You tried to stop my career, and all you did was give me the final push to pursue my own architectural destiny." I walked away from her, leaving her standing alone, utterly ruined, in the middle of a room full of the industry peers she needed to impress. She lost her dream project, her professional license, her reputation, and her 15-year friendship, all as a direct, traceable consequence of her own malicious choice. The aftermath was a long process of emotional recovery and professional ascendance. My design, Phoenix Rising, won the competition and is now slated for construction, catapulting my career to the absolute top tier of the industry. The story of Sarah's sabotage became a whispered legend in the architecture world, a cautionary tale about ethical conduct and professional integrity. I was seen as the victim who fought back with intelligence and principle. I pressed charges related to the hacking, resulting in a felony conviction and a temporary suspension of her professional license, the final seal on her fate. I changed my number, moved to a different part of the city, and have not spoken to her since. She is a non-entity in my life, and that silence is the greatest reward. I had to destroy the friendship to save myself and ultimately, to save the integrity of my industry. I don't regret it for a second. The depth of my success now is a direct measure of the depth of her failure, and it all stems from her original, cruel betrayal. I want to thank you all for listening to this painful, but ultimately triumphant, story of betrayal and revenge. It's a hard reminder that sometimes, of the ones closest to you are the ones who harbor the most dangerous resentments. Like this video if you were on my side and believe my revenge was perfectly timed and justified. Subscribe for more stories like this, and share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I handle the climax professionally, or should I have been even harder on her? I'll see you all in the next story.